Welcome to Oak City Church, a family of learners, lovers, and givers sent. For more information, visit us online at oakcitychurch.com. Let us know if we can help you in any way. Thank you for listening.
We are in Esther chapter 4, verses 12 through 17. And they told Mordecai what Esther had said. Then Mordecai told them to reply to Esther, "Do not think to yourself that in the king's palace you will escape any more than all the other Jews. For if you keep silent at this time, relief and deliverance will rise for the Jews from another place. But you and your father's house will perish. And who knows whether you have not come to the kingdom for such a time as this?"
Then Esther told them to reply to Mordecai, "Go, gather all the Jews to be found in Susa, and hold a fast on my behalf, and do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my young women will also fast as you do. Then I will go to the king, though it is against the law, and if I perish, I perish." Mordecai then went away and did everything as Esther had ordered him. This is the word of the Lord.
All right, is this on? All right, good morning, everybody. All right, for those of you who may be joining us for the first time, I'm not the usual preacher. I'm just a guy. I'm just Weston. I'm just Ken. I'm just Weston. Jeff is our usual preacher, and last week he introduced us that we're going to be taking a break from our series in Mark to focus on the upcoming Easter season. A lot of people weren't here last week because spring break. So I'm going to go back up over a few things from last week and talk about that this diversion is to talk about Easter eggs that are found in the Bible. Now, what does that mean? Are we stuffing Easter eggs back into our interpretation of Easter? As you know, there is no mention of Easter eggs in the Bible. But fun fact, we celebrate Easter eggs because of Christian missionaries in Europe. Many moons ago, a couple of centuries ago, the culture in Eastern Europe worshipped the pagan spring goddess of Esther, who represented fertility, and they had a spring festival where eggs were buried and eaten during the spring festival. Within this tradition, eggs were believed to be a symbol of fertility and the rebirth of nature after winter. So naturally, the missionaries thought of how this is symbolic of Jesus and incorporated it into their culture. And then candy came later, and now all I want is a Reese's Easter egg. Those are like the best. But my son's got peanut allergies. So. But that's not the type of Easter egg we're talking about in this series. An Easter egg is something that's intentionally put into a story or a movie or a piece of artwork that is subtle, but expresses a much larger meaning. Subtle symbolism put in there that if you know about it, you know about it, or you need somebody else to tell you about it. So I found some fun ones. I'll be honest, I didn't really know any of these again. Somebody had to tell me, so I'm going to tell you. Here's your Easter eggs for this week. Next week, Jeff is going to be doing this one more time, so he has an opportunity to upstage me. But we're going to, here's my best Easter eggs that I found. All right, let's start with Fight Club, okay? Did you know that in Fight Club, there is a Starbucks symbol in every scene of the movie? The movie is a thinly veiled allegory for consumerism, and the director mentions that hiding so many cups in plain sight points out the way in which the audience is conditioned not to even notice product placement. So the joke's on you as the audience. All right, next up, The Departed. Jeff likes this movie. I've never ever seen this movie, but Martin Scorsese sneaked in an X after X in this movie to foreshadow a character's death. So, next line. You can show it. Coming? Oh, sorry. Oh, yeah, I forgot to put that on there. Sorry. All right. That was late. That was a later addition. All right, but it's there. There's X's everywhere. It's crazy. All right, but one of my personal favorites, which, wait for the cue, is Jurassic Park. So do you remember in Jurassic Park the scene when they're all in the helicopter and Dr. Grant couldn't get the seatbelts to connect, so he ends up just tying the seatbelts together, and in the moment it looks like it's just showing his ingenuity. Well, turns out that the two seatbelts both have female ends. What happened with all of the female dinosaurs on the island? Do you remember? All right, so what? And what's the important quote? Life finds a way. So yeah, there's the little Easter egg hidden at the very beginning of the movie. Another personal favorite, Back to the Future. Woohoo! All right, so most of y'all know this, but so at the beginning of the movie, Marty and Doc meet at the mall to go over his time machine. He gets chased by the terrorists, zips back 30 years into the past. All right, and this is a question for y'all. What is the first thing that happens when he zips back into the past? What's that? We got one. Yes, it happens instantaneously. You shouldn't even notice it, but Marty runs into a pine tree. So it happens in an instant. You didn't notice, but when he goes back into the future, there's a subtle difference about the mall sign that you probably never noticed. Pretty great, huh? Completely throwaway in the background, but a huge detail that tells the story of what happened in the past. For comedy show fans, the show Community, this is one of the deepest cut Easter eggs that I found. But in season 1, episode 2, in a throwaway line, a character asks, "What's her name? Bitter Butter Beetlejuice?" Something like that. In season 2, so a year and a half later, episode 8, a character accuses another of wearing stripy turquoise Beetlejuice underwear. Y'all know where I'm going. In season 3, episode 5, another year later, a character comments that there's nothing spooky on your Halloween playlist but this Beetlejuice soundtrack and NPR podcast. Subtly, in the background, guess who walks by? In the background. Because what happens when you say Beetlejuice 3 times? He appears, right? Crazy. All right, 2 more. Because this is great. So Marvel movies. In Marvel, the executive producer is Kevin Feige, and Kevin Feige is a huge Star Wars fan. And so the way that Marvel movies works is you had phase 1 of the movies and you had phase 2 of the movies. Well, in phase 2 of every Marvel movie, 6 movies and 2 TV shows, a character loses a hand. Because what happens in Star Wars Episode 2? Luke loses his hand. So, can you go to the next one? Should be there. Yeah. So there's all the things that happen. All right. Last one, Barbie. That's why I said, I'm just Weston. All right. So number 1, Barbie goes into the real world, and she meets some mean girls at the high school. Now, so these mean girls, their names are Sasha, Yasmin, Jade, and Chloe. Now, if you're a girl who grew up in the 90s, do you recognize these names? Does anybody recognize these names? Yes. I heard it back there. Tiffany. Those are the Bratz dolls, right? And so, but even bigger than that, at one point in the movie, Barbie comes face to face with her creator in a really cool scene. And as they exchange the tea, the director frames the shot so that the scene looks like the Birth of Man painting. Cool, huh? So how many of you have seen these movies? And how many of these Easter eggs did you know about? Like I said, it took me a lot of research to know about these. The thing about Easter eggs is that it takes someone with an in-depth knowledge or study, or the director, to explain to you what it meant, or that they were even there in the first place. So let's jump back to last week, where Jeff started this whole message in Luke 24:27. Now, Jesus is walking to Emmaus with his disciples, and he says, "And beginning with Moses and all the prophets, Jesus explained to them what was said in all scriptures concerning himself." So the road to Emmaus could have only been a 30-minute walk, but instead he decided to take the long way, and the director of existence explains the Easter eggs of the Old Testament and how they all pointed to him. Like, how cool is that? Like, how wonderful would it be to be on that walk to Emmaus? So last week, Jeff started us with describing what one of these conversations may have looked like, looking at the parallels between Joseph's story and Jesus. Now, I won't go through it all. If you weren't here last week, you should really go. I nerded out. It was amazing. But the one part that I had never heard of or thought of or realized was through God's interpretation of the dreams of Joseph's fellow prisoners, the baker and the cupbearer. So two people, one representing bread, and the cupbearer, what does he have in his cup? Wine that he gives to the king. So two people, one representing bread, one representing wine. And after the third day, two people, one was killed, one was exalted to the right hand of the king. And Jesus calls us to drink the wine and eat the bread in remembrance of him. And on the third day, he was both, and during the 3 days, he was both killed and exalted. The baker and the cupbearer were there all along. And so it's mind blown, right? Like that. I thought it was amazing. This week, we're going to be talking about Esther. Now, the point of going back through these, is not for fun trivia, like knowing what happens when you say Beetlejuice 3 times. It's to take a step back and find comfort of the type of creator that God is. Sometimes when we don't know what God is doing and we don't think God knows what he's doing, and you're asking yourself, well, what is God doing? God knows what he's doing. And so at the end of today, I want you to know 3 things. Number 1, be amazed at the director of the movie of life. Number 2, know that you are not a coincidence. You are part of a much larger story. You may be an Easter egg in the background of someone else's story. So be intentional about your actions. And 3, even if you're full of disobedience or drama, you are loved and forgiven because of what Jesus did for you. Grace upon grace upon grace is extended to you through your faith. Okay, so let's jump into the story of Esther. Now, the story of Esther is not as well known as the story of Joseph, so let's go over the who, what, when, where of Esther. To put things into perspective, Esther is about 1,000 years, and it'd be this way, 1,000 years after the story of Joseph, in the 400s BC, around about a half century after Daniel. Now, Daniel, if you remember, was in the Babylonian Empire under Nebuchadnezzar through King Cyrus. And this is where I get confused personally because all the ancient empires just kind of blend together. Well, here's the Babylonian Empire. Somewhere. It should be there. All right, well, the Babylonian Empire, it looks huge. But as Daniel predicted, the Babylonians would get overthrown by the Persians. So the Persians empire overtook the Babylonian Empire, and Daniel continued to live through the Persian King Cyrus. Okay, so here's the Persian Empire. Now, during this time, Jews have been exiled into Babylon, and now Persia, and are scattered throughout the entire Persian Empire. King Cyrus gave the decree among the Jews that they were allowed to return home to Jerusalem, but many remain out among, there you go. So that's Babylon, and then the bigger one's Persia. There we go. And so you can see how expansive this Persian Empire is. It's massive, right? But so the Jews were dispersed amongst Persia, ruled over by the Persians, and were not looked upon with high esteem amongst the Persian Empire. And here in the middle is Susa, the capital of the Persian Empire. And this is where Esther takes place about 450 BC. Now, why was Esther written? Esther is written as a retelling of the events that led to the Jewish celebration of Purim, commemorating the deliverance from death of all the Jews that were scheduled to be killed in Persia. And Esther is one of the main protagonists of the story, a Jewish girl who becomes queen and intercedes on the behalf of Jews to stop Persians from killing all the Jews within Persia. So the book of Esther and Purim are intertwined with each other because King Esther is the one who lived through the events and declared this story to be written down. Okay, that was a lot. That was your history lesson for today, so let that sink in for a second. But let's switch gears and go from the history channel to like reality TV because there's about to be some drama up in this place. I was talking to Ryan Johnson a couple of weeks ago, and he said that he's the type of person that loves historical documentaries. So that's for that people. There's also a lot of drama, like for people who like The Bachelorette. Like this is all stuff together in the story of Esther. So like Jeff says, you should read your Bible. There's drama, there's history, there's something for everyone. So the tone in which Esther had the story written down is not historical or strictly historical like Luke or Chronicles is written. It's a historical narrative with melodramatic flair, structure, and tension. So it's not a dry retelling of this is how people were saved. It's let me tell you the story of how I saved our people, because Esther had this declared and written down. This is a big deal. So Purim was established to celebrate this big deal, and it's actually still a huge celebration held by the Jewish community every year. It's a big cultural party started by reading Esther, what they call the Megillah, with lots of audience interaction. People dress up in beautiful clothes, they clap, and they boo and hiss at certain times in the story. And you'll meet the main nemesis, Haman, here in the story. And as they do in Purim, feel free, you, to boo or hiss and make noise to blot out his name. Jews call this the banging of Haman. It'll make sense in a minute, but that'll be a little taste of Purim in our church here today. All right, so let's start. Scene 1, chapter 1. The story starts off with a focus on King Ahasuerus, which is a transliteration of King Xerxes I, the historical Persian king. He's in his first year of rule, and he's displaying all his might and his money, and he's throwing opulent parties for 180 days. I mean, look how much might he has. He's gloating his power. And on one of these nights of this half-year party, Xerxes, in a drunken stupor, calls his wife, Queen Vashti, and asks her to flaunt herself and show off her beauty to the court. Bad mood, dude, right? And so she refuses him. So what does the king do? He banishes her. He banishes her from his kingdom and declares an edict that no woman can respond like Vashti did. He's drunk, he's opulent, he's powerful, and he's ruthless. This is the tone of the story that was set, right? All right, scene 2. Meanwhile, we meet Esther and Mordecai. Now, Mordecai is Esther's cousin who has raised her since birth, but now she's a lovely young woman. Now that Vashti is gone, the king decides he wants a new wife. So he rounds up the most beautiful virgins in the city to test their worthiness in a lustful beauty contest. Esther moves into the harem with the other women, and one by one they are caught up to the kingdom to be put to the test. So, like I said, this is like the Bachelorette, like a really gross Bachelorette. Now, Mordecai, being a great dad, goes to the palace gates opposite the harem every day to check on his daughter and to offer advice. And one of the things he tells to her is to never reveal that she's Jewish. Esther demonstrates, over the course of months, Esther demonstrates herself as beautiful, humble, and becomes respected amongst the king's court. As a result, Xerxes chooses Esther to be queen. All right. The next scene cuts to Mordecai standing at the gate and overhears 2 guards plotting to kill the king. Ooh, more drama. And he tells Esther, who tells the king and gives Mordecai credit. So the king has it written down in the annals that Mordecai saved him. Now let's take a step back as we're starting off the story and notice that Esther starts the story in the lowest of lows. An orphan who was born without parents, a Jew exiled in a foreign land. And while she's queen, she was chosen because she's beautiful and doesn't ask for much from the most powerful man in the world. All right, scene 3. The story introduces us to Haman, who is a high-ranking official in the court, introduced as Haman, the Agagite. Now, that title, Agagite, is an immediate red flag to a Jewish listener. The Agagite means that he was a descendant of Agag, the king of the Amalekites. For those of you deep in your Bible knowledge, you'll know that Amalek and the Amalekites were considered the enemy of the Jews. So just as Jews began to wander in the desert, Amalek and Amalekites attacked the Jews unprovoked in their most vulnerable of time. So hearing that title, that he's an Agagite, would immediately be like hearing a story in a day with a character whose last name is Hitler. Like, it's the exact same analogy. You know, oh man, like this is not good. And so here he enters the story. So Haman, and that's the last time we can do it, proudly walks amongst the people wearing his nobility and rank, expecting people to bow. And they all do except for Mordecai, who refuses to, knowing his background and knowing who he was. Now, knowing Mordecai was a Jew, this enraged Haman so much that he told the king he'd give them 400 tons of silver in order to kill not just Mordecai, but all of the Jews in Persia. He cast lots to choose a date, which landed on the 14th of Adar, which is a few weeks before Passover. And the king gave him his signet ring, saying that you have the same power as me, to send letters to all of Persia to make it so. So the story's building. Big stakes are building here regarding the unjust punishment of Jews at the hands of their enemies. So scene 4. Mordecai finds out about the plot to kill all Jews, and he's devastated, knowing that he may have been the cause, and he's just a guy, powerless to do anything. He implores Esther to ask the king to change the edict, but she's terrified because she knows the law that if you enter the king's court without being summoned, the punishment is death. And remember his temper from the first scene? Like, she knows that, and he's ruthless. But Mordecai persuades her to intervene, and this is what Zach read at the beginning, that Esther then asked Mordecai to gather all the Jews in Susa and to fast for 3 days for her, saying that she will go to the king and says that she will intercede, and if I perish, I perish. So on the 3rd day, Esther dresses herself up as beautiful as she can in the finest of robe and goes and enters the inner court. Xerxes notices her and extends the scepter and delightedly calls her to approach him, telling her that she will be granted anything she wants. She invites the king and Haman to a banquet that she will be putting on. Haman goes home delighted at this request because it's symbolic of his status now. Like, it's just the king and Haman being invited to the queen's party. But along the way, he sees Mordecai and again becomes enraged. And after talking with his wife, Mordecai orders the guards to build a 50-cubit pole to impale Mordecai on. Now, you know how tall 50 cubits is? It's 75 feet. Like, it's not like a 10-foot pole. He wants everybody to see his hate for Mordecai. That's some hate. Drama, right? So, all right, scene 6. The king is now in his bed, and he's having trouble sleeping one night. So he's reading the annals, and he realized that Mordecai hadn't yet been honored for saving his life. The next day, he asked Haman how someone should be honored if they save the king's life. Now, Haman, with his ego, thinks that he's talking about himself. And so he tells the king that that this person should be robed and be led around the city on horseback. And so the king declared that Haman should lead Mordecai around the city on horseback in the finest of clothes. And along with that, Mordecai has to say this every other step. This is what is done for the man the king delights to honor. Like, just so much drama, right? Like, it's building. The next day, Esther's main banquet happens. And the queen musters her courage to ask. And I'm going to read this. If I have found favor with you, your majesty, and if it pleases you, grant me my life, this is my petition. And spare my people, this is my request. For I and my people have been sold to be destroyed, killed, and annihilated. If we had merely been sold as male and female slaves, I would have kept quiet because no such distress would have justified disturbing the king. So the king asks, who? Well, yeah, who is it? Who declared you and your people to be destroyed? Haman? And so the king is enraged and confused, and he goes outside just to catch his breath. And meanwhile, it's just a small gathering. Haman overhears this, and so he knows the stakes at her hand, and so he goes over to beg the queen to change her mind. Now, as the king goes back inside, as any good drama would have, Haman, it says that Haman falls at her. Now, depending on the translation you read, this means that either Haman is groveling at her feet, begging her, kind of like draped over her, or it means that he tripped and was literally on top of her, molesting her. And so the king walks back in and he sees this. He sees Haman on top of his wife. And so, dudes, what are you going to do if you see another guy on top of your wife? You know what? And so, minutes later, Haman is impaled on the pole that Haman had built for Mordecai within minutes. All right, so final scene, Esther is given Haman's house, who gives it to Mordecai. Mordecai is given the signet ring, again, showing that he is basically the right-hand man, and sends out letters to all of Persian kingdom that the Jews will defend themselves, and and we see that as the story unfolds, Persians convert to Judaism and worship God out of fear. All right, so let's recap. The Jewish world is in mortal jeopardy. All Jews were to be slaughtered at the hands of their enemy, and Esther determines that she would intercede her own life on behalf of the Jews. Now let's cut back to that scene after she fasted for how many days? 3 days. All right. Now you couldn't approach the king without a summons under the penalty of death. What does this sound like? What does that remind you of? The Holy of Holies, right? All right. So only if the king extended the golden scepter of mercy could he change the penalty if you walk into the king's court uninvited, which he did. He showed mercy on the 3rd day. So on the 3rd day, she goes to her king, seeking by submitting herself to threat of death to deliver her people from the threat of death. So for 3 days, she's thinking she's as good as dead. It's kind of like if you know that your whole team's going to be laid off in 3 days. What's the only thing you're thinking about for 3 days? So if you just know you're as good as dead, for 3 days, that's what you're thinking about. So for 3 days, she's as good as dead. So she received mercy from the king on the 3rd day and was spared death, and it sets in motion the plan to reverse the plan to kill all Jews. Now, fast forward, Haman was lifted up on the pole that he built for Mordecai. Now, Jews would have understood the symbolism of being raised on this stake because in Deuteronomy it says that someone who is raised on a stake is cursed by God. And I hear, when I see that, I hear echoes of, my God, why have you forsaken me? Being cursed. Mordecai is then elevated to the right hand of the king and given his signet ring, and letters were sent out to all of Persia. Judgment came upon the enemies of the people of God, and people joined in the covenant of the people of God. Now, I'll be honest, the first time I read that, I didn't see those connections. And you may be thinking to yourself, yeah, that's cool and all, but that seems like a stretch. And maybe you're right. So let's at least acknowledge the elephant in the room that's going on over these past couple of weeks and talk on coincidences. Because one of the most fun details about this book is that the celebration of Purim is actually the plural of the Persian word for lots, as in casting lots. So in other words, this is what our culture today would call a roll of the dice. So Haman casted lots to decide on the date and time of killing all Jews. So Purim is an intentionally tongue-in-cheek, ironic name to bring to light that what looked like coincidence to plan all of Jews was actually of all the random dramatic events that happened, was actually a display of God's sovereignty and of his perfect timing. Now, my background is a statistician. You can boo him. What are the chances that blah? There's a lot of things that have been made unintentional Easter eggs. So, like The Simpsons in 1994 predicted that there would be technology with terrible autocorrects. So, if we can go to that. And in 1998, The Simpsons also predicted a President Trump. There's also a book entitled Futility, The Wreck of the Titan, a book about a British ship, the largest ship in the world that sinks in the northern Atlantic, published 14 years before the Titanic. And then, while I was doing this research, there's what people thought was an Easter egg in The Godfather, but turned out to be just sheer coincidence. So anytime you see an orange in the scene, a character is about to die. Directors say they heard about this Easter egg after the fact, but it was just an artistic decision to bring a pop of color into the dull-colored scenes. But it actually is true. Anytime you see an orange, somebody's about to die. So what do we do with this? Now, like I said, I'm a statistician, so this is where my background goes. So David Hand is a famous statistician who about 10 years ago wrote a popular book called The Improbability Principle. Now, he has some good points here about our tendencies as human beings to find connections where they may or may not exist. One of the more famous quotes from the book is this. As proof that that people say that some things are miracles, the quote is, "The extraordinary unlikely must happen." His improbability principle suggests that with enough opportunities, rare events will occur. Now, he doesn't say he's an atheist, but I think you can read between the lines as there's an obvious point to this book. It's like a dissertation to prove that people's faith in miracles are just the law of large numbers playing out. Now, I also saw a debate between Sam Harris, a renowned atheist, with Jordan Peterson one time in which he aggressively asked Jordan Peterson why he takes so much time to deliberate the answer to the question of the resurrection. He thought the answer was so clear. Why don't you just say, well, Jesus probably died on the cross? So it's funny to me because on one hand, there's an atheist saying that there's no such thing as miracles because it's too improbable to happen. On the other hand, David Hand concludes that there are no such miracles because the extraordinary, unlikely must happen. So what do we do with this? All right, so the tension of miracles of miracles versus coincidence is nothing new. So let's play out a scenario in our heads, okay? You can close your eyes if you want to, but imagine you're in Jerusalem in AD 33. Jesus just rode into town on his donkey, stirred up the crowds, was sentenced to death, walked through town, was crucified, and then died. The sky then turned black for 3 hours, and there was an earthquake. Though that was really weird and scary, everyone knew that the comfort of the beautiful white Passover moon, a moon that was hugely symbolic of God's deliverance and loyalty, would be coming into view that night. So shortly after the sun set in the west after the sun set in the west, the moon rose in the east, and this is what rises. We now know that there was a full lunar eclipse that happened on the day that this is of the crucifixion, and this is what it would have looked like. The God of the universe planned this event to obey the laws of physics from the very beginning of time, such that it would look like this on Jerusalem on that day. That'd be one crazy coincidence to say that orange in that scene wasn't planned. The word coincidence, if you read it in the Greek manuscripts of the Bible, is translated from the Greek word synkerion, which is a combination of two words, son and kurios. Son means together with, and kurios means supreme authority. So the biblical definition of coincidence means what occurs together by God's providential arrangement of circumstances. So I'm not sure what to do with all coincidences. As a statistician, math is my biggest weapon of quantifying uncertainty, so I understand where folks like David Hand are coming from. But math has this limitation. Ask David Hand to quantify what love is. Ask Sam Harris why probably not is the reason that Christ's resurrection was such a big deal, because it shouldn't happen. So every worldview has faith based in experience. And this is exactly what Peter was appealing to in Acts 2. When on the day of Pentecost, 50 days after the crucifixion, he tells the Jewish crowd a quote from Joel 2. The sun will be turned to darkness and the moon to blood. Hey guys, remember what we just saw? It was dark for 3 hours and then there was a blood moon? Like, this is not a coincidence. You saw it. This is Joel's prophecy. This is happening, folks. So let's read the rest of Joel's prophecy. And everyone who calls on the name of the Lord will be saved. For on Mount Zion and in Jerusalem there will be deliverance as the Lord has promised. It looks like God is playing chess while we're playing checkers. And I think that's the point. We don't even know what he's doing and we don't know what's going on. So Esther's inclusion in the Old Testament was and still is a source of drama. Why? Because it wasn't written by a prophet, and two, because it's the only story in the Bible that doesn't actually mention God's name. And yet, that's the point for the inclusion. It was a historical narrative, not a theological allegory. The telling was dramatic, but the events happened. The point of Esther is that despite what we see as chance, coincidence, or casting lots, even when we don't see him, God is sovereign. God will keep his promises to his people. Now, the biggest Easter egg found in Esther is that God's undeserved mercy and grace shines through. The band can come back up. Some people say that in the Old Testament, that the Old Testament should be read as a way of showing that God's people are incapable of fulfilling God's plan for perfection. Even when we walked with God in the garden, we failed. When he left us alone, we failed. When we were given kings, we failed. When we had prophets, we failed. And at the point Esther was written, the Jews were exiled as a result of failing to remain faithful to God. And yet God still extended his mercy and grace to his people through no works of their own. Now, I don't know why we don't celebrate Purim, but maybe it's because Easter is just that much bigger of a deal. It would be like your team winning the national championship, but you're choosing to celebrate games won in the middle of the season. Like, I don't know. But Jews lead lives trying to please God, knowing that nothing short of perfection pleases him, with sacrifices atoning for the sins. Christians understand that we are made right with God, not because we're capable of trying to please him, but because of the grace upon grace upon grace extended to us by Jesus on the cross. So walk away from today knowing this. God is doing things in the background, even when we don't see it. You are not a coincidence. You have value and purpose, and you are part of a much larger story. You may be you may be an Easter egg in the background of someone else's story. And even if you're full of drama or full of disobedience, you are loved and forgiven because of what Jesus did for you. Oh, Father, thank you for everything. I mean, you created the universe. You created, you spun the heavens in motion, and yet you give us free will to do things that you don't command. You allow us to mess up time and time again, and yet you show us grace time and time and time again. God, I'll go through today and I'll make mistakes. I'll go through tomorrow and make mistakes. I'll go through the rest of my life and I will make mistakes, and I will not be worthy of you, God. But thank you that you've extended me your grace. Thank you that you've shown glimpses of your grace throughout all of history, throughout all of time, and that you are faithful to the end. It's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.